Joining me today is Doug Noll, author of De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. In an era marked by deep social and political divisions, disagreements can escalate quickly. Tensions surrounding politics, religion, and personal beliefs often lead to hostility, bullying, or emotional confrontations. Doug Noll offers a fresh set of listening and communication strategies designed to help people respond effectively when emotions run high. He demonstrates practical ways to handle anger, both in others and within ourselves. The techniques focus on strengthening emotional awareness, encouraging empathy, and guiding conversations toward resolution rather than conflict. He's a distinguished fellow of the International Academy of Mediators, which is the world's most prestigious mediation organization. And also, Doug, who is an attorney, was also a Purpose Prize Fellow for pioneering the Prison of Peace program, teaching emotional literacy to violent offenders in maximum security facilities for over 10 years. Welcome to the show, Doug. Nice to have you on today.
Thank you, Kathryn. I'm honored to be here.
Okay, well, you are de-escalating angry people, which is what we need you to do today. Obviously, not just with prisoners, and I know you do it in C-suites and you do it with CEOs and with people in Congress, but I think we all need to know how to do this in our daily lives. So,
In my opinion, this is a foundational skill of life. Every human
yeah,
being needs to know how to do this.
yeah, but we need more of you. We don't seem to, because we're not
Yeah.
doing it.
I know we've got centuries of misapprehensions about emotion, and we have decades and decades and decades of misinformation about how to listen and how to be with people. It's a lot of the stuff that people are teaching today are based on humanistic psychology from the 1950s. It's not based on science. It's based on limited observation, and yet the training persists even though it's ineffective.
Yeah, you talk about this is neuroscience, right? And we're talking about the emotional quotient. We talk more about the IQ, I guess, or we focus more on our IQs rather than our EQs.
That's right. I mean, and the truth of the matter is, there's no such thing as rationality. And so to the degree that we think that we're being rational in conflict is crazy. Conflict is all emotional, and when you become emotional, threat status goes off in the emotional centers of your brain, and it has veto power over your prefrontal cortex, and it exercises that veto power every single time. So, and the other thing is, our brains can't distinguish between a physical threat like a saber-toothed tiger and a social threat like an insult, and we react exactly the same way, fight or flight. And that gets us into the fighting to be right in arguments, and the constant stuff that we see in couples arguments, for example, the same patterns over and over and over again. And it's sad because it's all unnecessary.
Unnecessarily, but as you say, we do it. But I have to ask you just personally, obviously, you were a commercial trial attorney, which seems to me that's the commercial trial, a litigate, whatever. You are out there fighting the battle, and then now you've gone over to the other side. Or how did that happen?
Well, yeah, my journey has been extremely interesting. I was a civil commercial trial lawyer for 22 years. Tried, I don't know, 200 trials or something like that over that time period. Due to a series of circumstances over a long period of time, I came to the conclusion in the late 90s that although I was an excellent trial lawyer, that was not my calling. And I went back to school and earned my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies. And in 2000, left the practice of law, left $10 million on the table, walked away from my law practice, and became a peacemaker.
Now, were you sorry, or have you ever
Oh my
been
God.
about leaving the 10 million on the table?
My God, it was a smart. Sure, I don't I do not regret the money. I've learned since then that money doesn't matter. If you've got enough to pay the bills,
Yeah.
you're okay. You're going to live. You're going to survive. And it was really, not only was it the best business decision I made, but it was the best holistic decision for me. I served more people in a week than I served in 22 years as a trial lawyer. I mean, think about that.
Yeah. So how do you do it? Let's get down to the basics. So you
Okay.
have the cornerstones of de-escalation, because
Let's
that's
teach let's teach everybody how to do this
how
because
to
it's
do
so,
it.
yeah, it's
Okay.
so powerful. Two
Okay.
words. Two words. This is all you got to remember. Two words. You feel. Just say that. You feel. And then add an emotion. So let's just test it out. Kathryn, just think of a situation in the last couple of weeks that has a little emotionality to it and tell me the story.
A little emotionality in a couple of weeks. I could give you a
Most people can. Just tell me a story. The first thing that comes to your head, tell me the story. And everybody listen and listen to what I do.
Okay, I'll tell you the story. I think I got into a political discussion. I'm always getting into political discussions, right? With one of my sons. And actually, we're on the same side politically, but he sort of used this kind of terminology to describe a political figure, which I thought was kind of too general, and it sounded actually, here I'm getting into it now, right? It sounded ridiculous. I wanted him to be more specific. What are you talking about? Why
So
are you call? Yeah. Okay. Is that
yeah,
enough?
so you're getting into this political discussion with your
Yeah.
son, and you're starting to feel a little frustrated and annoyed because your son isn't being specific enough, and you're looking for clarity, and he's providing ambiguity, and that's a little upsetting to you. But mostly, it's just annoying.
Yeah. It's more than to me, because I like to win an argument. I have to. It was more than just a little upsetting.
It
I was
was
getting.
upsetting,
It
and
was, yeah.
you have a strong competitive instinct, and you're okay fighting to be right,
Yeah.
and you like arguing with people, and proving people how smart you are.
That's true. You do understand where you do understand where I'm coming from.
There you go. All
You
right.
nailed
So
it. Okay.
what did I do there?
You de-escalated. You recognized that I have you validated my feelings.
There you go.
That's
That's the
what you
word.
did.
Exactly
Yeah.
correct. Good
Uh-huh.
job.
Yeah.
I validated your feelings. I didn't argue with you. I didn't try to fix you. I didn't offer up any opinions. I didn't try to solve the problem for you. I didn't invalidate you. I just listened to what you were feeling and named your feelings and the word is you feel. And in your case, the words were annoyed, upset, frustrated, maybe a little disrespected. I didn't use that word, but that was certainly in there.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened to you as you brought the memory up and you felt the tension inside yourself? What happened when I de-escalated you?
I calmed down.
Exactly.
I could feel it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I,
And this happens in every single brain, every single time, because it's the way our brains are hardwired. There's neuroscience to support this. Brain scanning studies show that when you name what somebody's feeling, the emotions of the centers of the brain associated with negative emotions are inhibited, and at the same time, the part of the brains associated with emotional self-regulation is activated simply by the fact that you're naming somebody's emotion. And they calm down in 90 seconds. They can't help themselves.
it just happens. It's something that, as you say, it's neuroscience. Something happens in our brain. The
That's right.
amygdala, is that the
That's
part of
right.
the
Well,
brain?
the amygdala, part of the amygdala is
Yeah.
part of the system. It's the amygdala hypothalamus connection quiets down, and the associated regions in the limbic system, which is in the center of the brain, all quiet down. And at the same time, a part of the brain called the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, which is where our emotional control is, activates. In the old days we had a 3-key reset on computers, right? It's
Yeah.
like you're resetting the brain.
It's a switch.
It's a switch.
But Doug, you have a skill. You're very skillful at doing that, and not everybody is. I mean,
Well,
how do we? Yeah, how does we sort of be able? How do we just the? Well,
the,
now I'm a therapist, so I do that. Let's say, and I and a social worker, and I have been accused by my family, sometimes friends, that are you trying to therapize me because
mhm.
you're and
So
please don't do that. And that's what I get. That's some of the feedback, not all the
okay,
time, but
there are three primary objections that people give me with this technique. Number one, who do you think you are? My
yeah.
therapist, right? Number one. Number two, what if I make a mistake? Number three, that's the most rude, condescending, patronizing thing I've ever seen in my life. Those are the three primary objections. They are all fear-based objections. They're based on people's own fear of themselves and their own fear of being in the emotions of another person. They have nothing to do with calming another person. And there's a long history behind all of this. So, first of all, the therapy objection, or don't do that to me. Basically, when that happens, only happens in the early stages when you're learning affect labeling, or you're learning how to name feelings, because you're too aggressive. And all you do is you stop. Just stop. And don't apologize. Don't do anything. Just stop. And then 10 minutes later, come back and just give a one-off name, like, oh, you're frustrated. And make it really conversational, really subtle, and really nuanced. They'll never notice it, and they'll calm down. And you just learn you've got to be nuanced about this. The second one, which is, what if I make a mistake? Who cares? The speaker doesn't care. You know, there are a couple of situations there in that little vignette we did where I didn't get it quite right, and you corrected me. You said, "Oh no, I'm annoyed." Oh, you're annoyed. You weren't upset by the fact that I didn't get it right. So that doesn't matter. And the last one, I was interrupting you. Did you feel interrupted?
Did I feel interrupted? No,
Yeah.
I didn't feel it. Yeah, well,
Exactly right. You didn't feel
I
interrupted.
did not feel interrupted. No.
No, you did not, because I was listening to you. And here's the thing. People, when they hear this, they apply the rules of conversation to the rules of listening. I'm listening. We did not have a conversation. I was listening to you. And the rules of listening are different than the rules of conversation. You are expected to interrupt and name emotions when you're listening. You have to. And the speaker does not perceive that it's rude or patronizing or interrupting. The speaker feels gratified that finding somebody taking the time to listen to them.
Yeah.
That's why I call this listening somebody into existence.
So, Doug, does this work with children?
Beautifully.
Yeah.
The
How does
study,
it-
the
okay.
studies show that if you do this with children starting at about 3 years old, by the time they're 8 years old, 5 years, they're grade levels ahead of their peers. They have emotional maturity far beyond their age. They're socially accepted by everybody. I mean, and here's why. Most parents, it happened to me, I'm sure it happened to you, most parents invalidate their children emotionally. So a 2-year-old goes outside, runs around, skins her knee, starts to cry. What is she told? It doesn't hurt. Stop crying. Be a big girl. Don't be a drama queen. Pull up your big girl panties. Those are all statements that parents and caregivers give to children that tell children that emotions are bad, emotions are evil. You're not allowed to feel emotions. It's unsafe to feel emotions around us.
What do you do when you're in the grocery store and the 3-year-old is having a meltdown?
You get down on the ground with a 3-year-old and you say, you're really angry. You're tired. You're unhappy. You want to go home. And you just keep repeating that over and over again. And in 2 minutes, the child would be perfectly calm. Every single time. It's the brain. It's how the brain processes information. I've got emails from so many parents who've told me that they had 2 and 3-year-olds with terrible tantrums. And they started naming the child's emotions. And within 4 months, the tantrums were gone forever. And there's a whole biophysiology why children have tantrums. Tantrums are good things. Tantrums are not bad. Tantrums provide two huge benefits to a young brain. Number one, a tantrum is a circuit blow. It's a circuit prevention system that keeps the brain from getting harmed. Have the tantrum blow off get all this emotional energy out because the child is overwhelmed. The second benefit is that at 2 years old, we're starting to develop emotion. We're not born with emotions. We create emotions. And so children have to learn how to create emotions.
Oh, but wait, I have to go back. We're not born with emotions.
We are not
So
born
what
with
about
emotions.
the infant who's crying and uncomfortable or whatever the
That's
reason
called,
for it?
what we are born with is something called affect. And there are 9 basic affect. We take those affect at 18 months, right around 18 months, but right around verbalization. And we take those affect and they're like colors on an artist's palette. And we start having these affective experiences and we start naming them. Anger, annoyance, irritation, frustration, feeling invisible, feeling ignored, feeling unsafe, unhappy, worried, concerned. We start labeling these affective experiences we have. And if we're lucky enough to be raised in a family with emotional coaches for parents, we start developing an emotional vocabulary that associates words with these experiences that we're having. And that's called emotional categorization. Unfortunately, parents invalidate their children and they do exactly the opposite. Instead of helping a child build emotional resilience and emotional vocabulary, they shut it down. And so by the time the child is 6 years old, 6 to 8, the child realizes this is an emotionally unsafe world. I'm going to shut down. And they do. And they stop maturing emotionally. They put on this exterior front that makes them look really happy, but underneath, inside themselves, they're a mess. I know I was. And I have never met anybody who didn't go through that experience. And that's
How
why
do
we have addiction, and that's why we have mental illness, and that's why we have people in prison, in the extreme cases. And the cure for it is really simple. Name the child's emotions until they
Okay,
calm
I'm going
down.
to make it a little bit more complicated. Okay, that's one child. That's whatever the context is. But let's say you're in a family situation and you have the mother or the grandparents or whoever are caring for the kids, and there are two or three kids who are fighting and having meltdowns, and you have a group situation, and as a parent or a grandparent, you are at your wits' end. What do
Well,
you do?
welcome to mediation.
Yeah.
That's what I
Call,
do, right?
I know, call Doug. Yeah.
No, no, no. It's really simple. First of all, you quiet them all down. Everybody be quiet. And then you take the child who is the most upset, and you do this in the presence of all the children. And you say, you name the child's emotion. You're really frustrated. You're angry. You feel like you're being ignored. You're really upset and sad and frustrated. And you're feeling a little embarrassed. Everybody in the room will quiet down because here's what's going on. As you name that one child's emotions, the mirror neurons in the other children's brains are firing. And they're modeling unconsciously, this is all unconscious, they're modeling what's going on in the room, in their own brain. So they are literally calming themselves down. And then you turn to the next child and you label them. And you turn to the next child and you label them. And when they're old enough, you start having them label each other. End of problem.
Yeah.
5 minutes, it's all over with.
I'm so glad I asked you that, because I think sometimes the sort of parents tend to take the child, as you say, the one who's acting out the most, and separate them. Okay, come
No,
with me, right? That's
no,
not, yeah.
no, wrong.
Don't do that. Yeah.
Don't do that. Don't do that. You've got to, children don't know how to manage emotions. Why do we expect a 4-year-old to be rational? Not that there is anything like rationality. There's no such thing as rationality. We have to teach them. We weren't taught ourselves because our parents didn't know and our grandparents didn't know. Now we know. And we know that the upbringing of the past was wrong. And it's time to change. And it's not difficult. It's no harder than learning how to ride a bicycle.
So what's the response of the professional community? We're talking about the therapists and the social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists. What do you say to them? Yeah.
I say to them, my niece is a psychologist. She's got a
Okay.
PhD. She never, when she was studying for a PhD, I'd ask her, what are you learning about this stuff? They're not taught any of this stuff. They're taught stuff that was formed back in the humanistic psychology era of Carl Rogers.
Yeah.
And they're taught a little bit about cognitive psychology, which is now outdated information. They're not taught neuroscience. They're not taught to any great degree. And they're certainly not taught about emotions and what this stuff is. What they do, it's just a carried wisdom forward from their professors who learned from professors who learned from professors. And right now, there is a huge battle going on academically between psychologists, psychiatrists, and neuroscientists. I mean, massive academic battles because the neuroscientists are saying the DSM is wrong. It's scientifically unsupportable. And the psychiatrists and psychologists are saying, yeah, but the insurance companies pay off the DSM, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So the neuroscientists say, oh, we don't care whether they're paying it or not. Why don't you start using something that is based in science rather than based on pop psychology or Freudian psychology, which, again, is an empirically wrong perspective. There's no science.
How do you de-escalate those arguments? I mean,
It's the same thing. Just label the
yeah.
emotions. People get into it. When people get heated, you go in and you simply name what they're feeling, and they calm down. And then you can have a conversation. You may not agree, but you can have a conversation about it.
I think another one of the situations, everyday situations, context is in divorces.
Yep,
50% of the people still, or 45% are getting divorced, right?
that's right.
And those are really toxic
That's
usually.
right.
Yeah.
So
So,
I'm working with one of my students is trains people how to become divorce coaches. And she now has module in all of her divorce training where she's teaching her divorce coaches how to do this because it's so powerful. You can look, divorce is not easy. I've gone through one myself.
as have
Mediated
I. Yeah.
I've mediated divorces. It's one of the most difficult things that you can go through as a human being. But I will tell you that when you learn this skill, it makes the process easier. First of all, how do you calm yourself down? You calm yourself down by simply naming your own emotions. I'm really frustrated. I'm really angry. I'm enraged. I feel completely disrespected. I feel invisible and unheard. I feel manipulated. I feel like I've been used. I feel betrayed, rejected, abandoned. I'm really sad. I feel grief. Name all the emotions that come up for yourself with an I statement. And that will calm you down. It has the same effect on the brain. That will calm you down, put you in a place where you can engage in problem solving in a more deliberative way. You know, the ex-spouse isn't going to have this skill and is going to be highly emotional. And if necessary, you can say, label them. You know, I mean, especially if you have to have a parenting plan and you're going to be parents forever for children into adulthood, you've got to be able to manage the nervous system of your ex. Let me repeat that. You have to learn how to manage the nervous system of your ex. And you manage that nervous system by naming their feelings. And
Now,
it
do you
calms
write
them
it down?
down.
Do you write it down like when you're in the midst of all of this? Let's say, wherever you are, but do you actually, should one do that? Uh,
Write down. You can
I,
you
I,
can
I'm feeling,
you can
I'm,
you can you
yeah.
can you can rehearse this ahead of time. I mean,
Hmm.
there's just a really small, limited number of emotional words that you need to know to do this. And you can rehearse it ahead of time so that when things get hot, you know what to say. But after you've practiced this a couple of times, it just comes naturally because it's so powerful.
So okay, let's say you're on the phone and you're having a discussion about the children with your ex and you're trying to, yeah. So then what do you do if
Same
you're
thing.
same
Same
thing?
thing.
Okay.
Texting, same thing. There's all
Yeah.
kinds of studies that show that this works. You know, I mean, the more distant we become from somebody in terms of the communication mode, whether it be phone, text, video, whatever, SMS, whatever it might be, the less connected we are. There's a really cool study that I'll just describe very briefly. Researchers took mothers and their teenage boys, and they connected electrodes to their scalps, and then they had the pair have a conversation, and they measured brain activity. And they measured brain activity in a conversation face to face, and then in a conversation virtually over video. What they found was in the face to face communication, 9 channels of the brain were open, and only 2 channels were open in the video communication. Think about that.
Yeah. I'm thinking about it. Yeah. That's and then so yeah. So now what do we only have a couple minutes left. So then what do we do with that information?
What we do with that information is recognize that texting, email, even video communication is not nearly as powerful as in-person communication. And we have to be the reason why we get Zoom fatigue is because our brains are working overtime to try to figure out what's going on in the room. We can't smell them. We can't smell the pheromones. We can't hear. We can't pick up on all the data. We only have some visual cues to work off of. So we're getting really tired. And that means we have to pay even more attention to what people are experiencing emotionally so that we can label them when it's appropriate and appropriately.
Yeah, because what we're going to, I mean, we're not going to stop using our cell phones. We're not going to stop
No,
texting. I
no,
mean,
no.
that's whatever it is, good or bad, that's what we are doing. And I
Correct.
think, right? So
But this
how do
still
we,
works. This still works. You just have to work at it harder.
you are
I,
a wealth of such practical information. I love it.
well, like I said, I help more people in a week than I helped at 22 years as a trial lawyer.
Yeah.
I'll just leave you with one quick story
Okay, go ahead.
out of the prison project. So this was back in 2010. We had my colleague Laura Coffer and I started Prison of Peace, where I spent 10 years teaching murderers how to be peacemakers in maximum security prisons. And we walked into our very first prison, 15 women, ages 30 to 65. All lifers are serving life sentences or long-term sentences. And we began to teach them how to be mediators and peacemakers. I didn't think we were making any progress for 5 weeks until we came in week number 6, and a woman, Sarah, one of our students, was sitting in the corner crying. And we went up to her, and she told us this story. She said, I'm serving a 25 to life sentence because I killed a family of 4 as a drunk driver. When I came to prison, I had to give up my 3-year-old boy to my sister to raise. And I've written him every single week for 18 years. I've never heard from him. He's never visited, never called, never written back. Last week, I wrote him a different kind of letter. I thought about what it must be like to be the son of an imprisoned alcoholic killer. Abandoned, rejected, unloved, betrayed, embarrassed. And I wrote him that letter. And today, for the first time in 18 years, I received a letter back. And at the bottom of the letter, he said, Mom, I love you. And she was holding the letter and her hands was shaking, and her tears had made the ink run, and her thumb was over the word love, like she couldn't let go of it. And her son and his boyfriend and his girlfriend came to visit her in 3 weeks. That's the power of this stuff.
That is the power. That says it all. Yeah, that's quite a story. Yeah.
That was the first of many, many stories.
Many stories. Well, yes, I'm sure there are a lot more, but boy, it's a good one, and I thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Okay, so 1 minute left. Give us platforms, websites to go to.
I built up a page on my website for your particular audience, Kathryn. So if on that website, people can get a free ebook that describes this work. They can join my De-Escalate Academy, which is a community where people are learning these skills and we practice them. You can get a copy of my book, De-Escalate, get an online course if you're interested. The URL for that is Doug Noll, DOUGNOLL.co/Zox, capital ZOX. DougNoll.co/Zox. Webpage, only people in the world that are ever going to go to that webpage are people that are listening to this show right now.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you, Doug.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. And Doug Noll, De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. Great having you on the show. What else can I say? Joining me today is Amy Littlefield, author of Killers of Roe, My Investigation into the Mysterious Death of Abortion Rights. Okay. Healthcare. Well, now I'm just losing my place here. Okay. Um, Roe versus Wade, 2022. Uh, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, and Amy's immediate response to the ruling, they are going to kill people. How she provides a deeply reported account critical to understanding the anti-abortion movement strategy over the past 50 years. Pairing her poignant reporting with her love for murder mysteries, Killers of Roe is an abortion whodunit that introduces unexpected characters, secret killers and suspects, and hidden motives behind the death of a fundamental human right. She sets out to investigate the murders of Roe, and as in every good murder mystery, the killers turn out to be those least expected, from the disgraced former congressman obsessed with offshore tax avoidance to the retired grandfather who wrote one of America's most diabolical anti abortion policies. The plot twists lurk around every corner as she meets believers, opportunists, and complicated heroes. Amy is a frequent commentator on abortion for TV and radio news outlets, podcasts, including MSNBC and Democracy Now! Welcome to the show, Amy. Nice to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathryn. It's great to be with you.
Okay, so this is kind of a unique context to put the Killers of Roe into a murder mystery, kind of like Agatha Christie, I guess, kind of. And it also reminded me of like that game Clue that we used to play. Uh,
Yes, a
yeah,
favorite in my family too.
yeah. So, yeah, so how did that come about? Why did you decide to do this? Why did you decide to use that genre?
Yeah, so I've been a murder mystery fan my whole reading life. I started reading Agatha Christie in middle school, and it helped me get through adolescence, which is a pretty tough time, as I
Yeah.
think anyone who's been there can attest. And I found myself returning to murder mysteries when I was a new mom. So I had my first kid in April 2020. It was the pandemic. It was a pretty anxiety-provoking time. We
Yeah.
were all sanitizing our mail and so forth. And I had this tiny little newborn. And that was, of course, the moment, a few months into that to new motherhood for me is when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and when it became clear we were going to lose the constitutional right to abortion. And because that had been my beat for about a decade, I knew that women were going to die as a result. And I was so angry and so sad. And yet I was sleep deprived and anxious and in this fog of new motherhood. And about the only thing I could read was murder mysteries. I found them really comforting, as I had when I was a teenager. And so this sort of started out as a way for me to entice myself to take a deep dive into the archival material and the interviews that I was going to need to do in order to answer the question of how this happened, how
Okay,
we
so
lost the constitutional right
gonna,
to abortion.
so who done it,
Yeah.
right? You're gonna
Oh
try
my
to find
gosh,
it.
you're going to skip
But
to the end already?
yeah, well, no, no, I'm not. We're not gonna.
Spoiler
We're
alert.
not gonna. I'm not skipping, just
Okay.
interrupting. Yeah, because there was. I mean, the surprises, though. I guess is. I mean,
hmm
you're the person that I maybe I said this in the intro. Like those who you think were the people or groups responsible for Roe v. Wade being overturned were not necessarily the ones that you thought, right? It
Exactly.
was very
Exactly. I
different
mean,
when, yeah.
yeah. I mean, we know, anyone who has an awareness of sort of the news headlines on this issue over the past few years, I think is aware of who the obvious players are, right? The Supreme Court justices who were appointed by Donald Trump, the Alliance Defending Freedom that brought the legal case that resulted in Dobbs v. Jackson, the case that overturned Roe v. Wade. I think we know that story from the news coverage. I wanted to dig into the lesser known parts, right? I think the anti-abortion movement managed to construct one of the most successful social movements of our time. Now, I happen to disagree with their entire project, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that I don't have to give them some credit for that organizational strategy. And so I was interested in the
And
more
also,
behind
I
the
want to
scenes
stop you there.
figures.
Because we need to understand that, right? I
Of
think
course.
one
Yeah.
of the things that you I think point out is this didn't just happen after 50 years in because of one event. This was like a whole, I don't want to say insidious, is that the right word? But kind of like a way of undermining Roe v. Wade that happened over these 50 years that we ignored. Uh, uh,
Yeah, yes,
yeah,
I think that's absolutely right. I think it was an incremental strategy that was sort of death by a thousand stab wounds, is how I talk about it in the book, right? Some of
yeah.
those wounds were deep and penetrating and made a lot of news headlines, and some of them were very quiet. When bills passed in the Arkansas state legislature or in Mississippi, or when there was only one clinic left in South Dakota, are those sort of more incremental chips in abortion access maybe didn't make headlines in the same way. And so I was really interested in the sort of the grassroots figures, the behind the scenes people, the folks who were aging in obscurity out there and who you hadn't heard of, who played a really important and even deadly role in the death of this constitutional right.
Yeah, let's talk about well, at least one of the, we don't want to give away the whole story, but as you said, I don't want to do that. But yeah, give us some examples.
So the person I probably spent the most time with for the book was a man named Paul Herring. He had been a state lawmaker in Texas. He was an early anti-abortion activist, and he had come up with this idea he was pitching to the Catholic leadership in 1974 for a ban on federal funding of abortion that would put the procedure off limits for most people on Medicaid. This was kind of this strange scheme and idea at the time, and the Catholic leaders were really skeptical of it. They didn't think it was going to pass. They thought it would just be another loss. And what they wanted was to ban abortion nationwide using the Constitution. And he's this sort of remarkable figure because then, of course, what ends up happening is Congress 2 years later passes this policy. It's named for Congressman Henry Hyde. It becomes one of the most notorious and popularly supported, at least by the politicians, not so much by the American people, policies in the history of the anti-abortion movement. And we still have it in place today. It's renewed by every single Congress since 1976. The Hyde Amendment bans federal funding of abortion and puts it off limits to most people who are on Medicaid. And so, finding him, Henry Hyde's, of course, the more famous figure behind this ban, but Paul Herring had written this early draft of it. And he's, retired grandpa, spent a lot of our time together trying to convert me to Catholicism. And I kept coming back to him because he just seemed like such a true believer. And I really wanted to understand the role of people like him in this incredibly politically successful movement.
So I'd like to understand him too, and I think my audience would as well. So diving deeper, I guess, where was he coming from? This grandfather that you're talking about, who um,
Right.
wanted to convert you to Catholicism.
Right, right. So, I went into it with, I think the assumption that a lot of folks on the pro-choice side make is that people who oppose abortion hate women, right? And that misogyny is behind abortion bans. And I don't want to, say that the patriarchy doesn't play a role here,
Yeah.
right? I did find that in a lot of the interviews I conducted, a lot of the research I did. But I also found that there were other more complicated motives at play. And so for Paul Herring, he was trying to convert me to Catholicism. He believed that because he was a Catholic, because he opposed abortion and had followed what he saw as God's plan for, his life, he was going to go to heaven. And he kept saying to me some version of the most important thing is we go to heaven. The most important thing is we go to heaven. And it almost was like became like this marketing pitch, that if I would convert and get baptized in the Catholic faith, that I could go to heaven. And, I think he was coming from a place of strong belief. He had been raised in the Catholic faith by a mother who was very devout, whom he loved. Um, he had gone to church, twice a week as a kid. Um, And so I think his faith was genuine, but there was this sort of opportunism in the way that he framed it to me. Like, if you do this, you'll get into heaven, you'll get your ticket stamped at the gate. And when I knew to listen for that motive, I heard it actually in a lot of the interviews I did with a lot of the anti-abortion activists across time and place in this history.
So it has to do with one's belief system. Religious belief system is one of the major motivating um, factors, I guess, in banning abortion. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's certainly one of them. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no question the anti-abortion movement is overwhelmingly a religious movement. I interviewed some of the folks. There's a couple atheists sprinkled in there, and they're kind of these oddball figures in the anti-abortion movement, right? And some
So
who
what's
even
their reason?
espouse
Because they don't
progressive
believe in heaven and
politics.
hell. So,
Sure,
yeah.
sure. Yeah, I think they share with some of their more conservative counterparts a sense that they are participating in the great civil rights struggle of their time, right? And I think that has to do with a history where the anti-abortion movement really grew out of this reactionary backlash, not only to feminism and to legal abortion, but also to the civil rights movement and to Black Americans saying that we needed to confront white supremacy. And I think for white conservatives, and the historian Jennifer Holland looks at this in her book, Tiny U, for white conservatives, the anti-abortion movement was really appealing because they could join a movement that sounded a lot like the civil rights movement, that used social justice rhetoric, about the right to
Yeah.
life, for example, but was championing, the fetus who was mostly imagined as white. I think that there are progressives who have a genuine love for, commitment to the embryo or fetus, and see that as a cause, that is tantamount to a civil rights cause. And are willing to defend it for that reason, and are willing to, shamelessly co-opt the language of civil rights and social justice because they see it, not as we would, as sort of a reactionary, struggle against women's rights, but as something progressive and advancing the rights of, the unborn in their view.
So the reasons are so complex as you're describing, not some of them, not all of them. But can we fast forward to like today, for instance? Because as I understand it, because we don't have that much time, but the abortions there are more abortions now since Roe v. Wade was turned down, and because of why don't we talk about
That's
that?
right. That's
The
right.
opposite
So
has happened for different reasons and
yes.
different. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, it's a very complicated picture since we lost the constitutional right to abortion, right? It's now been almost 4 years since that happened. And I think a lot of people had predicted there would be a huge spike in unwanted births, right, as a result. We have seen some, I think the estimates are, around 22,000, additional births that have happened. I think there's stories emerging all the time of people who have been OBGYNs, for example, who say they know patients who have been forced to carry pregnancies to term by abortion bans. And then, of course, we have ProPublica's reporting into women who have died terrible and preventable deaths while suffering miscarriages or complications from abortion, who have not gotten adequate treatment because hospitals have delayed their care, while following what they see as the mandates of abortion bans. So, that's one side of it. I don't want to say, everything's, terrific and
Yeah.
and turned out to be better than expected, because that's not true, right?
Yeah.
If you have one person dying a preventable death, then that's a tragedy. Um, but this huge rise in unwanted births that had been anticipated has been blunted by the fact that the sort of the true believers on the abortion rights side have really moved to the forefront and have gotten really creative in the wake of the Dobbs decision. And so we've seen 8 states pass shield laws. These are blue states like New York and California and Massachusetts that will protect people who send abortion medication into states where abortion is banned, and effectively, legally immunizing doctors in states like New York who are doing this brave work. And that means those doctors can't travel to Texas, for example, because they might get arrested. But as long as they stay in the states where they have protection, they're doing this work. And so, thousands and thousands of medication abortion kits per month are making their way into rural Mississippi and, Alabama and Texas and people there. And because these medications are quite cheap and these services have found ways to do this affordably, in some ways, abortion is more accessible in these hard to reach places than it had been before. And so that's a really interesting plot twist in sort of our current landscape of abortion access. And it's been enabled by the true believers, the kind of
Yeah.
quiet heroes who are on, in my view, the right side of history as well.
Yeah. And I do agree with you. I've always been a supporter of Planned Parenthood. I do have one issue because I'd like to discuss this with you. I've always felt that the and this is maybe not the best word to use, but the marketing of abortion rights has always been based on a definition of why women have abortions, which is inaccurate. Like it's difficult to
Mm,
solve a problem if you don't define it properly. For instance,
mm,
like women don't have, it's always they always define that women will not have access if they are in rape and incest and the life of the mother, and they should be able to, that, and it's horrific if they don't. But that's not really why women statistically seek out abortions. That's
hmm.
really right. Isn't I mean that's not, and so we're not really. I mean the reasons, and I have to say that perhaps most all of the women in my sphere have had an abortion at one time or another, whether they've been 18 or 48. And for
Right.
none of those reasons that I just mentioned, it was either professional, financial, they have four kids, they had an affair and didn't want to have a baby and destroy a family. I can go on, but none of
Yes.
them. Yeah. Okay. So,
Yes,
uh,
there are as many
yeah.
reasons to have an abortion as there are people who have had them, right? And
Yes. Yeah.
often there are many overlapping reasons. I mean, when I was in my 20s, I worked as a counselor in an abortion clinic, and I heard so many different stories from people who, as to why they were seeking an abortion. Very often, finances played a role, right? And so this is why, there's this inherent contradiction in a conservative project that wants to take away the right to abortion and yet has eviscerated the social safety net that might allow people to contemplate having the families they want to have, right? You can't look at those two rights in isolation. Um, and so that's absolutely true. I think you're right. I think we could see this, for example, at the Democratic National Convention, right, in 2024, when we saw abortion was this huge issue because of the Dobbs decision, and Democrats were sort of talking about it in a big way on the national stage. But the stories that are highlighted tend to be white women who are married, who have wanted pregnancies, and then the pregnancy goes horribly awry. Now, as you point out, that's not the majority, or, cases of rape or incest. That's not the majority of stories, and it sort of skirts this issue of women's empowerment and feminism, right? Um, you know, I think you're absolutely right. I think this is why we should applaud the work of abortion storytellers. My friend Renee Bracy Sherman, who I talked to for the book, has this saying, everyone loves someone who's had an abortion. And she tells her own abortion story, which was about she didn't want to be pregnant at the time when she got pregnant, and helping people understand there doesn't need to be a reason other than that. So I think that is powerful work. And it's why I have to roll my eyes, as I've been talking about the book. You often hear from people, oh, abortion, that's sort of fallen off the radar. Oh, you don't hear about abortion that much these days, because there's not, because maybe they're not hearing Democrats talking about it as much. But it's like when you have something that one in four women will experience in her lifetime, and so many people have personal stories. I was on a panel recently, and people in the audience were standing up and sharing their abortion stories, spontaneously. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like it's only not an issue if you think women don't count in our political
Yes.
consciousness, right?
Exactly, and I think those stories are very are important. I think you really have to tell the real story, and I don't think, and not to repeat, but we haven't been doing that, and we
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
yeah. And I think that's important. And I think it's important, and I'm going to say this for Planned Parenthood too, to be able to do that. You got to, yeah, you have to tell the true story. And I'm glad you commented on that. Yeah, I had, in college, I had girlfriends who had boyfriends who they got pregnant by, but and maybe nice young men, but nobody they were going to marry or had what
Hmm.
intent, so they, and didn't have access to abortion. I had a friend who's had to tell her father, and he had to pay in those days $5,000 to get an abortion,
Hmm.
which she did, and she later married her somebody else, and I can go on and on with stories too, but yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I talked to someone recently for an article I published in the New York Review of Books, someone who lived in Texas, was going through a separation from her husband who had been, cheating on her, and she'd been doing all the work at home, and, was finally fed up. They separated, and then she realized she was pregnant, and knew that he would try to claim, that the pregnancy was an act of God and that they should stay together. And because of these telehealth options, she was able to access an abortion even in a state where it's banned. And so, those stories continue today. I mean, it's why you see domestic violence agencies being on some of the amicus briefs for these court cases trying to defend medication abortion, right? Because they know that unplanned pregnancy can trap people in abusive and violent marriages as well.
So where can we go from here? What do we do? I mean, you're the expert, you've had a lot of experience, you've heard a lot of stories on both sides. In terms of where we only have a few minutes left. So, yeah, so what should we be doing in order to protect women's rights?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work happening on the ground with medication abortion circulation, and for people to be informed about those options. I mean, some of the activists I've talked to have said information really is access in this moment. When you can get a medication abortion kit for free or for $5 shipped to your door, even in a state where abortion is banned, then information is the key. So websites like Abortion Finder, I Need an A, and PlanCpills.org are places people should have in mind if they need to help a friend, find access to information about how to safely navigate an abortion, even in a state where it's banned. I think the other thing that I really feel is urgent as a journalist. I think the anti-abortion movement has been incredibly skillful at studying us, right? They studied the left, they studied the civil rights movement, and they really copied the playbook and reverse engineered it to dismantle women's rights and civil rights. And so I think why I wanted to write this book is to learn from our opposition, right? I wanted to learn about them because I don't think you can defeat a political project unless you know it and understand it on a deep and human level. And so I think when you start to study it, what I saw is there were rifts in their movement, there were disagreements, there are fractures in the MAGA coalition and fractures between the Christian right and Donald Trump. And I think those divides and those fractures are worth looking at in terms of our politics as well. Um, so I hope people will learn the history that's captured in the book, the past 50 years of history, because one of the things that I learned is that everything that seems brand new is actually, on repeat
Yeah.
in terms of US history. It's not totally new or out of the blue, right?
I think that's why your book is so important. And I think Americans, particularly, we shy away from history, any kind of history, or even understanding it, or the context of where all this stuff happens, which is what obviously in this case you point out over the past 50 years. Uh, I think that we get polarized, right? I don't want to hear what they have to say. I don't care. This is, and we don't delve into how we got here. And that's
Yeah,
what,
I think
yeah.
that's true. I think it's hard to listen to people who have different perspectives from
Yeah.
yours, right? I think that's part of the reason we don't understand each other very well. And I'm not saying understanding means sympathizing with them, right?
Yeah. Or
Um,
agreeing. It doesn't mean agree. It
a
means
hundred
yeah.
percent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I do think that we need to understand. I mean, and that's the sort of bargain of the book, right? Is that I offer the sort of murder mystery format that was a way for me to entice myself to tell the story. I hope will entice the reader to dig in, know that I'm there with you, that I'm, taking you
Yeah.
along with me to talk to these folks. And it can be hard to sit in a room with them and listen. But I hope the murder mystery format does make that accessible for readers who want to know this history, but for whom, facing reality head on is pretty tough, understandably so in this moment.
Well, I think you did it. And I think we can, yeah, you're our example. We can do it, right? And start by reading your book, Killers of Roe, My Investigation into the Mysterious Death of Abortion Rights. And I've been talking to Amy Littlefield, who's the author of this book. So, Amy, give us a platform and websites to go to for,
Sure. Thank
yeah.
you so much. My website is amylittlefield.com. I'm on Instagram at Little Amy Field, and I'm also on Blue Sky with my full name. And you can buy Killers of Roe. I would love if you bought it from your local independent bookstore. That's my favorite, so that we support indie bookstores and keep them in business at the same time, or on bookshop.org if you don't have a local independent bookseller.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for being on the show today and sharing all that information.
Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah.